In the bright living room of the house, the accusation fell like lightning. The girl, with the necklace in her trembling hands, looked terrified at the woman who pointed at her harshly. From the doorway, the millionaire father, just arrived, was paralyzed witnessing the scene. His daughter was being humiliated by the person he trusted most. What he was about to discover would change not only his home, but the very meaning of the word dignity. What city are you watching this video from? And what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. And before continuing, let me wish you health and peace. Tell me, from which country and at what time are you watching this story? In the living room illuminated by the autumn lights of Boston, an unexpected gesture seemed to seal family peace. Beatrice placed a pearl necklace around Elena's neck. Before Don Alejandro's emotional eyes, the girl, surprised, could barely articulate a timid, "Thank you." While her father raised his gaze toward his wife with a mixture of relief and gratitude, Beatrice's smile seemed perfect, but her eyes hid a fleeting gleam of calculation. Alejandro, however, didn't perceive that shadow. For him, that moment was proof the family was consolidating. His second wife had known how to earn her place, and the gift of that necklace seemed to confirm it. The afternoon passed among the aroma of good red wine and plates of appetizers distributed over the table. The house, spacious and elegant, was located in an upscale Boston neighborhood, where streets filled with golden leaves and the autumn cold began to be felt on the sidewalks. From the living room window could be heard in the distance the preparations for the upcoming fall festival, with its lights and music. Inside, the atmosphere seemed warm, though under that appearance invisible threads of tension were already beginning to weave. Alejandro, a middle-aged businessman with straight bearing and barely graying hair, raised his glass. "To our family," he said with a firm voice. "May it continue growing united." Beatrice, impeccable in her dark dress and radiant smile, reciprocated the gesture, placing a hand on her husband's arm. Matthew, Beatrice's son, applauded enthusiastically, while Elena, still surprised by the necklace resting on her neck, caressed the pearls like someone touching something too delicate to belong to her. "It's beautiful, Mom. Beatrice," the girl whispered. Beatrice tilted her head, smiling sweetly. "Now it's yours, Elena, because you're part of this house and you should feel it." The phrase, said in a soft voice, slid like honey, though the gleam in her eyes had a colder shade. Alejandro moved, interpreted those words as a sign of generosity and not calculation. The evening continued with small details that gave the illusion of harmony. Beatrice offered pieces of prosciutto to the children, asked about Elena's school, listened attentively to Alejandro's comments about business. Everything seemed to fit in a perfect picture designed to impress any visitor. Elena, timid, responded barely with short phrases, but inside she debated between gratitude and a vague unease. She wasn't accustomed to receiving gifts, much less from that woman whose sweetness always seemed too studied. When the toast moment arrived, Alejandro raised his glass once more, this time with greater effusiveness. "To this new beginning," he said, "to the unity we so needed." The guests, a couple of close friends who had joined that afternoon, nodded, and the echo of glasses filled the room. Elena smiled, though she did it more to please her father than from conviction. Her hands rested on the necklace again and again, as if she needed to make sure it was still there, real, tangible. Beatrice, watching her sideways, hid a fleeting grimace behind a sip of wine. Night closed with Boston's usual murmur. Traffic on Commonwealth Avenue, some street musician playing guitar on the corner, and the ringing of bells announcing Vespers. Inside the house, Alejandro allowed himself to relax, convinced his wife's gesture had sealed a fragile but necessary balance. Elena, meanwhile, kept silent. She couldn't know that necklace, shiny and cold, wasn't an innocent gift, but a piece on a much darker board. Her small fingers traced the pearls with an unconscious gesture, while her childish mind imagined they were frozen tears. Alejandro, satisfied, kissed his daughter's forehead before sending her to her room. "Rest, little one," he said tenderly. Beatrice watched her leave with a serene smile, but upon closing the door, her eyes hardened for an instant. It was barely an imperceptible blink to everyone except someone watching her very closely. Alejandro raised his wine glass and toasted to the family's new unity. Elena caresses the necklace in silence, without imagining it will soon become the cause of her pain. A few days later, the home's warm air turned to knife. The necklace had disappeared. The memory of the toast, with glasses raised and words of unity pronounced by Alejandro, still resonated in Elena's memory, but now contrasted with the tension permeating every corner of the house. It was a cloudy autumn afternoon with low clouds tinting Boston's rooftops gray. In the kitchen, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee seemed more bitter than usual. Beatrice walked through the room with firm steps, opening drawers, lifting tablecloths, searching corners with calculated drama. "It can't be. It was here just recently," she murmured, though her eyes fixed again and again on Elena. Alejandro, seated at the table, followed each movement with concern. "Are you sure you've checked everything?" he asked, trying to sound serene. Beatrice sighed and turned toward him with a pained expression. "Yes, Alejandro, I've searched the entire house. The necklace isn't here, and you know who wore it last." Elena felt her heart freeze. She had caressed those pearls with affection, but it never occurred to her to remove them from the jewelry box where Beatrice asked her to keep them. "Dad, I don't have it," she stammered with a trembling voice. Beatrice leaned toward her, placing a hand on her shoulder with poisoned sweetness. "It's okay, sweetheart. We all make mistakes. Maybe you put it somewhere else and don't remember." Alejandro's gaze rested on his daughter. It wasn't an open accusation, but doubt had settled in. The silence weighed as much as words. Elena swallowed, incapable of holding those eyes seeking an answer. Beatrice continued her theatrical search, lifting sofa cushions, checking pockets of coats hanging on the rack. "How strange, not here either. So where could it be?" she commented aloud, making sure each word penetrated Alejandro. Finally, she stopped in the middle of the kitchen and with a calculated gesture exclaimed, "If it's not here, someone took it. And we all know who wore it." Alejandro frowned, trying to maintain calm. "Beatrice, don't jump to conclusions," he said. But his words sounded more like a tepid defense than firm support for his daughter. Elena, with tears accumulating in her eyes, approached a step. "Dad, I didn't do it. I would never do something like that." The silence afterward was deafening. The coffee maker emitted a final hiss, and the smell of burnt coffee filled the kitchen, as if the air itself had become unbreathable. Beatrice intertwined her fingers with Alejandro's, feigning to seek comfort, while her cold gaze fixed on Elena. The girl, trembling, felt the accusation weighed more than any punishment. She searched in her father's eyes for a spark of confidence, but only found doubt. The world suddenly seemed more hostile than she had ever imagined. Elena, with tears in her eyes, whispers, "Dad, I didn't do it." But Alejandro's silence weighs more than any word. In the shadows of her room, Elena opened a blue notebook and let her tears turn into words. The day had been too long and too cruel for an 11-year-old girl. She still felt the echo of Beatrice's voice accusing her in front of her father, and what hurt most wasn't the accusation itself, but Alejandro's silence, incapable of raising his voice in her defense. That silence weighed like a stone in the girl's heart, stronger than any scolding. The bedside lamp barely illuminated the room, drawing elongated shadows on the walls. Outside, the autumn wind hit against the wooden shutters, reminding Elena that Boston was preparing for November's cold. In the distance could be heard the church bells marking the hours, a solemn sound that had always transmitted peace to her, but that night seemed a distant and sad echo. With pencil in hand, she began to write in the blue-covered notebook, the only place where she felt free. Words flowed between sobs. "I don't need the necklace. I just want Dad to believe me. I'm not a thief. I never would be. Why does he look at me as if he doubts? Why does his silence hurt me more than any punishment?" Each letter traced with tears was like a choked scream, impossible to pronounce aloud. The room was full of modest details. The single bed covered with thick blankets, the crucifix hanging next to the door, a shelf with rag dolls that had belonged to her mother. On the dresser, a black and white photograph showed little Elena hugging her mother at a neighborhood fair. The girl raised her gaze toward the image, seeking comfort in that disappeared smile. "Mom, what do I do?" she whispered with a thread of voice. "How do I make Dad believe me?" The photograph's silence was the only answer, but inside she felt a spark of warmth, as if her mother's memory gave her strength to resist. At that instant, heavy steps resonated in the hallway. It was Alejandro, who had just closed the folder of company documents. He had tried to concentrate on numbers and balances, but his daughter's sobs had pursued him all night. He stopped in front of the bedroom door, resting a hand on the knob. He hesitated. Enter and comfort her, or continue keeping silent as if time could resolve everything. Pride and distrust weighed more than love, and Alejandro walked away a few steps, though his heart asked otherwise. Elena, exhausted, closed the notebook and hid it under the pillow like someone protecting a treasure. She lay down, hugging the blanket tightly, and sleep conquered her slowly. Her hands still gripped the pencil as if it were a talisman against injustice. Before falling asleep, she thought, "If Dad reads my words someday, he'll know I never lied." Then a gust of wind suddenly opened the window, agitating the curtains violently. The notebook slipped from the bed to the floor, remaining open precisely on the page where her most intimate confession was written. The ink, still fresh, shone under the lamp's dim light, like a secret about to be revealed. The door opened slowly. Alejandro, unable to sleep, had returned to check on his daughter. The hallway's light filtered into the room, illuminating the fallen notebook. Alejandro remained motionless in the threshold, observing Elena asleep with her face damp from tears. He lowered his gaze to the notebook open on the floor and took a step inside. Elena falls asleep with the diary in her hand, symbol of her hidden truth. A gust of wind opens the window. The notebook slips to the floor, remaining in view, just as Alejandro slowly opens the door. Boston's streets filled with lights and flowers to honor the fall festival. But in Alejandro's house, tension remained hidden under fake smiles. From early morning, the city bustled with a festive air, parades, music bands, and entire families congregating in Faneuil Hall to share hot chocolate with donuts, as tradition dictated each autumn celebration. It was the day of the patron saint, and it seemed all the capital was united in the same pulse of joy. Alejandro decided to take the family to the church, convinced that participation in the celebration could relieve the tension breathed since the necklace's disappearance. He walked erect, greeting acquaintances with an almost obstinate pride, as if wanting to demonstrate to the world that everything in his home was in order. Beatrice at his side wore an elegant coat, distributing charming smiles left and right. Her sweet modulated voice mixed among prayers and choir songs. Elena, on the other hand, walked a few steps behind, holding Matthew's hand. She didn't speak. Her eyes swept over the lit candles and religious images, but her heart remained shrunken. Each kind word from Beatrice toward her sounded false, like an echo only seeking to impress others. The memory of the diary fallen under the bed pursued her. Had her father read it? Would he dare defend her someday? After the solemn mass, the family attended a private reception at the home of some of Alejandro's friends, business people from the same circle. The residence, located near downtown, was illuminated with crystal lamps and decorated with white flowers in honor of the celebration. Tables overflowed with red wine, prosciutto, olives, and Spanish omelets, while a guitar's soft music filled the atmosphere. Alejandro conversed animatedly with his colleagues, proud to show his wife as an example of virtue and elegance. Beatrice moved skillfully among guests, talking about charitable works and the care she provided the children. Many congratulated her for her kindness. "How lucky you are, Alejandro, to have found such a woman," they commented, and he smiled satisfied. Elena remained in a corner, playing silently with a folded napkin. Other guests' children ran around the table laughing, while she observed with a mixture of envy and sadness. Matthew, enthusiastic, joined the races, leaving her behind. Nobody seemed to notice the girl's discomfort except an elderly woman who caressed her head and offered her a piece of cake. Elena smiled weakly, grateful for that small but sincere gesture. Night advanced and toasts followed one another. Alejandro raised his glass, speaking of family values and the tradition that kept Americans united. Guests applauded, proud of their roots. Beatrice, in that propitious atmosphere, took advantage to drop her comment. With a voice charged with theatricality, she said, "Too bad that necklace was lost. It was so valuable to me. I gave it with my heart, and seeing it disappear breaks my soul." The words floated in the air like a shadow. Some guests turned their heads toward Elena, who shrank in her seat, her face burning with shame. Alejandro lowered his gaze to his glass, and an uncomfortable silence slipped among the applause. Beatrice, feigning a gesture of pain, placed a hand on her husband's shoulder. "But well, what's important is family unity," she added. After that phrase, the dagger of insinuation, Elena pressed the napkin in her hands until almost tearing it. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't allow them to fall. She lowered her head, incapable of holding the gazes resting on her. At that instant, from the back of the room, someone watched her attentively. It wasn't a curious guest or a mocking child. It was her own father, who for the first time stopped to truly look at the pain in his daughter's eyes. Elena lowers her head, but her eyes fill with tears. Someone watches her from the back of the room. Could it be her father at last? Among the laughter and toasts of the reception, a small and shiny object fell to the floor with an unmistakable tinkling. The sound abruptly interrupted the guests' conversation, who turned their heads toward where that unexpected gleam came from. In the middle of the room, Matthew had tripped while playing with other children, and from his pocket rolled, shining under the lamp's light, the pearls of the missing necklace. There was an immediate murmur, a surge of low voices that ran through the room like a sudden wind. "Isn't that it?" a woman whispered, bringing her hand to her mouth. Alejandro, astonished, took a step forward, his eyes fixed on the object resting on the carpet. He leaned down slowly, picked up the necklace and held it high so all present could recognize it without doubt. Beatrice paled. Her charming smile, always prepared, took a few seconds to appear, and when it did, it was fragile, trembling. "It must be a mistake," she murmured. She approached her son, caressed his head with restless hands. Maybe Matthew found it in some corner of the house and kept it to play. "Children do those things." But her voice lacked its usual security. Matthew, with wide eyes, didn't understand the weight of what had happened. He tried to stammer. "I just had it in my pocket. Mom told me to keep it for a moment." The innocence of his words was like a dagger that tore his mother's mask. Guests fell silent, holding their breath. Elena, from the corner, opened her eyes as if she couldn't believe what she saw. She felt a knot in her throat, a mixture of relief and sadness. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need to see Beatrice humiliated. She just wanted her father to understand. And then, like a broken whisper, she said, "I just wanted you to believe me, Dad." The silence became absolute. The guitar music stopped dead. Even the children stopped running. Alejandro gripped the necklace in his hand tightly until his knuckles turned white. He looked at his daughter, whom he had unjustly doubted, and then at his wife, who could barely hold his gaze. Everything he had believed about his new family's unity crumbled like a sandcastle. Some guests began to murmur among themselves, scandalized by the revelation. An elderly woman shook her head, murmuring, "Poor girl." Another man, Alejandro's business partner, coughed uncomfortably, looking away from Beatrice, who seemed to shrink under the weight of gazes. Alejandro breathed deeply, feeling the air become heavier. For weeks he had wanted to believe in his wife's goodness, in the harmony she promised him, but there, in his own hands, was irrefutable proof he had been deceived, and worst was having let doubt fall on his daughter, the only one who had always been at his side. Beatrice tried to speak again, seeking excuses, but her voice came out broken. "Alejandro, honey, it's not what it seems." Her gaze sought support in surrounding faces, but only found incredulity and reproach. The mask had broken, and with it the perfect image she had so carefully cultivated. Elena lowered her head, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She didn't cry from joy at being vindicated, but from accumulated pain, from the nights she had simply wished her father would believe her. Those words she had just pronounced without thinking contained all her truth. The necklace, symbol of lies and manipulation, now shone under the room's lights, but no longer had the same power. Alejandro held it firmly, as if it were a reminder of his error, and at the same time the opportunity to redeem himself. Beatrice stammers excuses, but her mask breaks before everyone. Elena murmurs, "I just wanted you to believe me, Dad." Alejandro grips the necklace in his hand. The room falls into total silence. The silence in the room weighed like lead. Everyone waited for Don Alejandro's reaction. He remained standing in the middle of the room with the necklace in hand, and gaze fixed on Beatrice. For an instant, time seemed to stop. Guests, restless, held their breath, aware of witnessing the collapse of a carefully constructed lie. Alejandro pressed his lips, and his voice, when he finally spoke, was grave and contained. I've been blind too long." His eyes moved away from his wife to rest on Elena, who continued huddled in the room's corner, her face damp with tears. Inside, something broke. The certainty he had failed the person who most needed his protection. Beatrice, desperate, took a step toward him. "Alejandro, honey, listen to me. I just wanted to avoid problems. It was an important necklace, and I thought—" Her words drowned in the guest's indignant murmur. Matthew, confused, hid behind a chair with eyes full of shame. For the first time, he seemed to understand his mother wasn't the heroine she had always painted herself. Alejandro raised his hand, demanding silence. "Enough, Beatrice. Don't continue. The truth has become clear." His words were firm, leaving no room for doubt. Then he turned to the guests with a mixture of dignity and pain. "I beg you to excuse this spectacle. It's not an easy moment for my family." With a quick gesture, he took Elena's hand and brought her to his side. The girl looked at him with astonishment, still incredulous that he had finally taken her side. The reception ended in a cold and tense atmosphere. Some left in silence. Others approached to briefly console Elena with gestures of tenderness. Beatrice remained isolated, wordless, facing reproachful gazes. The exemplary wife's mask had crumbled irreparably. The next day, Boston dawned with fresh and luminous air, as if the previous night's storm had cleaned the sky. Alejandro decided to break with routine. He took his daughter to a small bakery in the Back Bay neighborhood, a cozy place where the aroma of coffee with milk and apple pie filled every corner. They sat by the window and for the first time in a long while talked without hurry. Alejandro took Elena's hand and looked her in the eyes. "Forgive me, daughter. I doubted you when you most needed me to defend you. That won't happen again. I'm not perfect, but from now on I want to be the father you deserve." Elena listened in silence, moved, while playing with the spoon in her cup. Finally, she smiled timidly and rested her head on her father's shoulder. "That's all I wanted, Dad," she whispered. Before leaving, Alejandro stopped in front of a small nearby shop window selling simple and artisanal jewelry. He entered with his daughter and bought a modest necklace, a silver chain with a small star-shaped pendant. Upon giving it to her, he said, "This is nothing compared to your worth." The other necklace represented a lie. This one, on the other hand, is a symbol of what truly matters, the trust between us. Elena hugged her father tightly, and in that gesture found the certainty she was finally no longer alone. Outside, the church bells rang solemnly, as if the entire city celebrated that silent but profound reconciliation. The sound of bells filled the air, and father and daughter left the bakery hand in hand, walking through Boston's cobblestone streets. They needed no more words. They had recovered what was essential, that which no lie could take from them. The church bell's sound fills the air, as if the city itself celebrates the reconciliation. In Boston streets still seems to resonate the echo of those bells that accompanied the reconciliation between a father and his daughter. It wasn't the cold pearls of a necklace that united that family, nor kind words said for convenience. It was a simple gesture, almost silent, that had the power to change everything. The firm hand of a father asking forgiveness, and the clean gaze of a girl willing to believe again. That scene, wrapped in a Boston dawn's soft light and in the city's daily murmur, reminds us that true wealth isn't in what we show outward, but in what we're capable of repairing within the home. Dear listeners, if this narration has touched your heart, write the number 1 in the comments. If you feel it could have been told differently or there's something to add, leave a 0 and share your reflection. This story's teaching is clear and profound. True love is measured in acts of trust, in the courage to recognize a mistake, and in the strength to extend a hand. Don Alejandro understood, perhaps too late, that he had doubted the person who most needed his support. However, he had the courage to rectify. All of us at some moment in life have the opportunity to go back, apologize, and choose the path of affection. And that gesture, though simple, has immense reach. Like a lamplit in a home's window, it's capable of guiding us even on the darkest nights. Forgiveness doesn't erase wounds, but makes them bearable because it allows us to walk again beside those we love. Perhaps upon hearing this story, someone will remember an argument with a child, a word for which forgiveness was never asked, a pending hug. Life teaches us it's never too late to recompose what seemed broken, and that the true treasure isn't the objects we inherit, but the certainty of not leaving our loved ones alone. As in this tale, the pearl necklace was only a pretext. What was essential was discovering that trust and affection weigh more than any jewel. Family, even with its imperfections and fragilities, continues being the most valuable refuge we can build. So take a moment, dear listener, to reflect. When was the last time you trusted without doubt in someone who needed it? When was the last time you asked for forgiveness? If this story has made you remember, smile, or sigh, share it with those you love, because sharing is also sowing hope. And always remember that happiness arrives when we learn to live not only for ourselves, but for those who walk at our side. Like the church bells that ring over Boston, the echo of true love can accompany us all our lives if we have the courage to listen to it.